All right, thank you, Tracy, for inviting me, and Leslie for organizing everything. It's great to be here in Iowa. I'm also going to talk about redistricting, and I'm going to talk a little bit about partisan gerrymandering. That was kind of what I was tasked with doing. But rather than trying to convince you of different ways to measure it, which is what we're really interested in political science, I'd like to really talk about reforms. I think that's kind of much more interesting from a public policy perspective. And I think there's some very good methods of reforms, and this kind of follows up nicely with what Eric talked about, although I'm not a fan of commissions, so I'll give you a little bit of a different view, I suppose. Okay, so every 10 years, like Mike said, we redraw the electoral boundaries for all congressional seats, but also all state legislative seats as well. So this is really a massive undertaking. So it affects both legislative representation and also congressional representation. And the reason that, well, I'll get to that in a second. So in most states, as Mike pointed out, they're not in Iowa, passing a new map is done through the regular political process. So the legislature will pass a map, and the governor signs it or vetoes it. So if the state government is unified, again, like Mike said, you usually end up with a map that favors the majority party. If there's divided government, oftentimes you end up with a deadlock, or sometimes with a bipartisan incumbent protection plan. And if you ended up with a deadlock within the state government, it ends up in court. And oftentimes courts end up drawing lots and lots of redistricting maps. And this is true not only for those states that are unable to pass a map, but also for lots and lots of states that are able to pass a map, but then are sued. So almost virtually, I mean, so just this week, right, the Florida State Supreme Court approved a revised map of the state congressional boundaries. So this, I mean, it's an unbelievable amount of litigation. Texas is still not done. We're still not done in Texas. We're still waiting for a federal three-judge panel to make its decision. They heard the case like 3 years ago. And Florida might not still be done. I mean, the decision helps Democrats, but the northernmost, Corinne Brown, is a Democratic African-American representative. She's not happy with her new district, and she says that it violates the Voting Rights Act, and she says that she's going to sue in federal court, so we still might not be done in Florida. So it's really been, we're always, litigating, but this has been a really remarkable round, that so many states are still halfway through the cycle, still in litigation. So I want to make the case that gerrymandering affects everybody. I think that most of the public, I don't think I have to make this case very hard, because I think most public feel that partisan gerrymandering is a big problem. And so I don't think this is a difficult case to make. But if you think about the difference between legislative gerrymandering and congressional gerrymandering, right? If Oklahoma or Texas wants, the Republicans want to gerrymander the map, it doesn't affect you if they gerrymander their legislative map, but it does affect you if they gerrymander their congressional map, right? So if enough states, and the numbers are at the moment, there's a pretty good, the Republicans, not surprisingly, since they drew most of the maps, have an aggregate advantage. And so this affects everybody, right? It affects the whole country. So the Republicans have more seats in Congress than they probably should, right? If we had more fair districts across the country. All right, so how can we improve it? Lots of reformers want to work on the process, right? And the maps are drawn by state legislators, right? It's interesting to know that members of Congress have no power, no direct power in redistricting. Lots of members of Congress also hire lobbyists on their own behalf to lobby their own state legislators when redistricting comes around. In fact, one of our state senators says, every 10 years members of Congress come by and the state legislature, pretend like we matter, right? They come down to Austin and pretend like we matter because we have their fate in our hands for a brief moment. So state legislators draw their own districts, but not members of Congress are also at the whim of the legislature, assuming there's no commission. So reforming the process, and this appeals, I get why this appeals to lots of people, but it doesn't really appeal to me, because if we put the process in the hands of a commission or a court, right, these are all unelected bodies, right? I like having some control over, right? That's the great thing about legislators, and that's the reason why we have elections, is that we can influence them. And so if we take it out of their hands and give it to a commission, right, an unelected commission, there's no way for us to punish them if they do a bad job, or credit them if we think that they do a good job. And even if we do reform the process, it certainly doesn't guarantee that we're going to get a good map. Let me just see. So, for instance, in California, I'm a native Californian, and I don't want to. I'll pick on it a little bit. So their commission, their Citizens Commission, has 14 members. There's 5 Democrats, 5 Republicans, and then 4 people that are neither Democrats or Republicans. So those are really the only people that matter, right? I mean, so if you set up a commission, well, 5 people over here, 5 people over here, they just cancel each other votes out, and so you give the entire state, right, to the power of these 4 people. And who are they, right? I mean, are they independents? Are they libertarians? Are they Greens? I think they're all of those people. But those people typically make up a very small percentage of the state population, yet we've sort of turned over, right, or California, not we've turned over the process potentially to people that aren't part of the mainstream. So that just doesn't make sense to me politically. And then the Republicans, I know Republicans were dissatisfied in California with the process. And so it's all a conspiracy to them, right? They're like, well, the Democrats did a better job with those 4 nonpartisans, right? Somehow they stacked the deck. And that's really why I don't like the commission process, is that there's going to be winners and there's going to be losers. And then there's probably going to be conspiracy theories about how this happened. And that, I hate conspiracy theories, right? Because what can you say? There's nothing I could say to disprove it. And so I'd rather have the legislators do it, right? So I'd rather be stabbed in the chest than stabbed in the back, right? So if the Democrats are in control, I know they're going to pass a map that's going to favor the Democrats, and vice versa. But it's like watching National Geographic, right? When the lion kills the gazelle and eats it, that's what we expect to happen, right? And not that it's right, good or bad, but right. So we're not surprised, and we know where to credit or blame what happened. So I think reforming the outcomes is much more direct and much easier, and is far more likely to yield good outcomes. And so then I'll talk about my favorite restriction here in 1 second. And then I think a third way is to kind of use a mix of reforming the process and the outcomes. And this is either crowdsourcing legislative maps or allowing computer algorithms to draw presumably multiple maps that then legislators would pick from. So I'll talk about all of these. All right, so my favorite one for legislative redistricting is to set a partisan benchmark for the state, all right? And this is actually how we as political scientists measure how badly a state is gerrymandered, right? So we say, okay, what's the most, is Pennsylvania the worst one out of whack, Eric? I think it is. Pennsylvania is one of the worst. I think I have that in my example here. Yeah. So how can we tell? Well, because almost all of the congressional seats are Republican, but if you look at like state elections in Pennsylvania, it's a relatively close, maybe even a democratically leaning state. And so there have been several states that have proposed this, including Ohio recently, and also New Jersey. And so the idea is to say, let's figure out a way to measure how Republican and how Democratic we are ahead of redistricting, and then set that as a target, right? So we're 53% Republican in the state, right, whatever, Michigan. So congressional seats should be roughly 53% Republican and 47% Democratic, and the same for the legislature. And then after that, we can comply with the Voting Rights Act and compactness and contiguity, and end up with, maps that reasonably reflect the underlying partisanship. And so California, I think it's good if the Democrats did somehow hijack it. I think it's good, not because I'm a Democrat, but because the state is Democratic. And so I think the Democrats should have been in control. I don't think the Independents or the Green Party or the Libertarians should be in control in California, because California's Democratic. All right, so typically the way you do this is you pick a set of elections, statewide elections, the presidential election, gubernatorial election, senatorial election. In Texas, we elect 5,000 other people statewide, the railroad commissioner, right, all these. So you pick a whole bunch of these statewide elective offices and you average them. Now this can be a little bit tricky, right, because we're going to fight about which elections to pick and which elections not to pick. But once we get past that, I think we're in business. So here's the Pennsylvania example. So I looked at, over the last 4 years, the 2 senatorial elections, and the presidential, and then the gubernatorial election, and you can see that the average, right, the Democrats won all but one of these, and if you average them, right, the Democrats got 52.5% of the vote, and the Republicans got 47.5% of the vote. So that's a reasonable kind of estimate of the partisanship of the state. So the problem is that they have 18 seats in the House. So the current delegation is 13R and 5D, right? So it's nowhere near what it really should be, which is somewhere along the line of like, so 52.5% of 13 is 9.45 seats. So the obvious number of seats the Democrats should have in Pennsylvania, in my mind, it's either 9 or 10. That's it. There should be no real other outcome on paper. Right now, things can change. Elections can change this. There can be a swing in favor of the Republicans, and that's all well and good. But on paper, right, that it should either be 9 or 10. 5 minutes. All right. So commissions. Oh, I talked about this. So here in Iowa, you have the legislative, and it seems to work in Iowa, right? And I'm not entirely sure how, but you guys seem to be happy with it, and outcomes seem to be all well and good. I'm not quite sure why that's the case, but there's huge lawsuits. There was a huge lawsuit in Arizona. There's been lawsuits in California. And again, the problem with commissions is once you create a commission, how do you populate them? And Eric kind of implied it, talked about it a little bit, but the process to populate the California Commission is this like 8-step Rube Goldberg-like machine process, right? Where they're trying to, right, find the 14 people in the state that aren't political or something. And so, like I said, it's just, I think the process reforms are less likely to work. I think another possible way is to have computer algorithms draw maps. And I wouldn't have a computer draw one map and we're stuck with it. I think that let's have a computer algorithm or multiple algorithms draw dozens and dozens and dozens of maps, and then maybe set up a process after that for how we're going to pick one of these maps, right? So rather than letting somebody going around drawing their own maps, let's let the computers draw them, give them certain algorithms, and the algorithms are going to matter, right? But give the legislators a bunch of choices, and they could pick from those. There was some contest this last time in Virginia. There was a contest where they tried to get people, usually it was like law school students or undergraduate political science classes, to draw their own maps. And so I think those are other sources of where we could get maps that might produce less biased results. So we could limit the legislators. Partisan gerrymandering mistranslates votes into seats, and that's not a good thing. The Supreme Court is not likely to do anything. They've kind of, in the 2000 round, they kind of took away the standards that they had at that particular time. And at the moment, partisan gerrymandering is neither constitutional nor unconstitutional. And I don't think they're ready to take the issue back up again now. Maybe the next round, perhaps, we'll see, particularly if there's a change in the court. The flavor of the decade was actually racial gerrymandering. Racial gerrymandering is becoming even more of a morass with the litigation and whatnot. And it's still unclear to me where we're going to end up with racial gerrymandering. But that's really becoming, I study redistricting, but I think we might be at the point where it's like, having single member districts and defining geographies for our legislators seems to be a huge mistake to me. And so, maybe if we went to, not that it's going to happen, but if we went to a proportional system, we could sort of forget about all this, right? Instead of trying to draw certain districts in certain states for African Americans or Hispanics, we just have a proportional system, and naturally a Hispanic party would emerge, an African American group would emerge, whatever. We'd have 5 or 6 groups, parties, and that seems to be, it seems much more, the further we go down the road of restricting how people can draw the maps, it kind of gets uglier and uglier in my mind. So I think that's what I wanted to end with. So thank you very much.